Right now from Indianapolis at the 2026 NFL Scouting Combine, the biggest storyline surrounding the Philadelphia Eagles isn't just about draft prospects or workouts on the field. It's about direction. It's about philosophy. And after listening closely to Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni speak, it's clear this offseason is going to look different than what many fans have grown used to. For years, we've watched Howie Roseman operate aggressively. Trades, splash signings, bold moves, and free agency. That has been part of his DNA. He's never been afraid to outmaneuver the market. But this time, the tone feels more calculated, more internal, more about protecting what's already been built rather than chasing external fireworks. And when you break down the numbers, it makes complete sense. The Eagles were the most expensive offense in the NFL in 2025 in terms of cash spending. Think about the investments that are already locked in. Saquon Barkley received a contract extension after last season. Jalen Hurts has his extension. A.J. Brown has signed 2 contracts with the team. DeVonta Smith got extended. Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, and Lane Johnson all received new deals. That's the financial core of this offense secured long term. When you commit that level of money to one side of the ball, something has to give elsewhere, and that's where the defensive timeline becomes critical. Nolan Smith is approaching extension talks. Jordan Davis is approaching extension talks. Jalen Carter will eventually command serious money. The organization also has to think ahead about Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. This is the ripple effect of drafting well. Eventually, you have to pay your own stars. That's why one of the clearest takeaways from Howie Roseman's press conference involves Jordan Davis. The Eagles love him, not just as a player, but as a cultural pillar inside that locker room. Remember, defensive tackles historically take time to fully develop. Davis entered the league as a dominant force from Georgia, but early in his NFL career, he was more of a 2-down player. Conditioning was a concern. Stamina was a concern. That's no longer the case. In 2025, Jordan Davis elevated his game to an all-pro caliber level. His conditioning improved, his impact expanded, and when asked about exercising his 5th-year option, Howie Roseman didn't hesitate. Easy choice. He didn't even let the question finish. Reading between the lines, the Eagles don't just want the 5th-year option, they want long-term stability there. Now let's shift to another fascinating situation, Jalen Phillips. After being acquired near the trade deadline, Phillips thrived under Vic Fangio. In just 8 or 9 games, he generated more than 40 pressures. That production at a premium position matters, but here's the complication, his medical history. A medically retired situation in college, a torn ACL, a torn Achilles in the NFL. That risk factor changes negotiations. Still, he's young, he's productive, and pass rushers of that caliber command well north of $20 million per year in free agency. Based on Howie's tone and prior comments, the Eagles would love to bring him back, but only at the right price. This won't be emotional spending. It will be calculated value. Then there's the reality surrounding Dallas Goedert and Reed Blankenship. The sense is the Eagles may allow both to test free agency, not out of disrespect, and quite the opposite. Howie Roseman often does right by players. If Reed Blankenship, an undrafted free agent from Middle Tennessee State, can secure life-changing money, that's hard to stand in the way of. The NFL stands for not for long. Careers are short, windows are tight. Dallas Goedert's situation feels different, but equally understandable. He's at a stage where this may be one final opportunity to maximize earnings. If the market is strong, the Eagles may not match it, and here's where the offensive evolution becomes incredibly important. It's clear the organization intentionally pivoted toward a Kyle Shanahan-Sean McVay-style offensive system. That pursuit ultimately led to hiring Sean Mannion as offensive coordinator. This wasn't random, it was researched. It was deliberate. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman cast a wide net, gathering intel, understanding trends, evaluating where the league is heading. They believe this scheme fits their personnel, especially Jalen Hurts. There's a narrative floating around that Hurts cannot operate efficiently under center or in a heavy play-action structure. The numbers say otherwise. Last season, his passer rating on under center throws was 113. That's elite production. You're gonna see more under center. More play action, more run-heavy sequencing, and that directly impacts 2 players, DeVonta Smith and Saquon Barkley. DeVonta Smith has already produced 3 1,000-yard seasons in 5 years. Elite route runner, smooth separator, strong hands, high football IQ, but internally there's belief he hasn't been fully maximized yet. In a system that moves receivers around, slot, outside, backfield alignments, Smith could unlock another level entirely. Saquon Barkley, meanwhile, enters 2026 in a potentially explosive setup. Yes, he led the NFL in touches last year and showed some wear late in the season, but if the offensive line stays healthy and the run-centric scheme functions as designed, Barkley could benefit tremendously from the spacing and play-action threat this system creates. One final note that shouldn't be overlooked: Brandon Graham. Howie Roseman made it very clear the door is open. Graham's interior pass rush impact last season impressed the front office. Beyond production, he represents leadership, culture, and versatility. With only Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt under contract at edge, depth is needed. Graham can provide it inside and outside. So when you step back and look at everything collectively, this offseason doesn't feel like a splashy external spending spree. It feels like strategic internal reinforcement, protecting culture, extending core pieces, modernizing the offensive scheme, and making disciplined financial decisions instead of emotional ones. The Eagles aren't standing still, they're evolving. And here's the big question heading into the heart of this offseason: do you believe prioritizing internal extensions over major free agency splashes is the right move for this roster right now? Because if you really think about it, this is a defining crossroads moment for the organization. For years, the aggressive, headline-grabbing approach worked. Big trades, big signings, big swings. But what we're seeing now is the consequence of drafting well and developing properly. When you hit on your picks, when your young defensive core matures the way this one has, eventually you face a financial squeeze. And that's not a bad problem. It's a championship caliber roster problem. Let's go back to the defensive side for a second, because this is where the future budget pressure becomes real. Nolan Smith has developed into a legitimate edge presence. Jordan Davis has grown into an impact interior force who commands double teams and collapses pockets. Jalen Carter is trending toward being one of the most dominant defensive linemen in football. When you have three foundational defensive pieces like that, you don't let them walk. You prepare years in advance to keep them. And that preparation means you can't overspend in March just because a flashy name hits the market. That's also why the Jalen Phillips situation is so delicate. His production under Vic Fangio was undeniable. Over 40 pressures in limited games is elite level impact, but the Eagles have always balanced talent with durability risk. Howie Roseman's approach isn't emotional, it's analytical. If Phillips's market climbs beyond what they believe aligns with long-term cap health, they'll pivot. That's discipline. Now offensively, this is where things get fascinating. The hiring of Sean Mannion signals philosophical change, not minor tweaks. Real structural change. More under center formations, more play action layering, more condensed formations designed to create mismatches. And that's critical because it maximizes multiple pieces at once instead of isolating production to one or two stars. Jalen Hurts becomes the engine of that transformation. The idea that he can't thrive in this system simply doesn't match the numbers. A 113 passer rating under center last season is not a small sample anomaly, it's evidence. Play action creates defined reads. Defined reads create rhythm. Rhythm creates efficiency. And when Hurts plays in rhythm, the entire offense flows differently. Now imagine what that does for DeVonta Smith. Instead of static alignments, he can motion across the formation. He can be stacked behind receivers. He can attack linebackers from the slot. He can create separation with space instead of constantly fighting press coverage on the boundary. The belief internally is that Smith hasn't even peaked yet. That's scary when you consider he already has 3 1,000-yard seasons. Then you layer Saquon Barkley into that same structure. A run-centric system doesn't mean predictable. It means physical identity, outside zone concepts, play-action boots, defensive hesitation. If Barkley enters 2026 refreshed and the offensive line remains healthy, there's a real path to him reasserting himself as one of the most dynamic backs in football. Last year's workload was heavy. That showed late. But structural efficiency could actually reduce unnecessary hits while maintaining explosive output. Now let's circle back to culture, because this organization values it more than almost any franchise in the league. Jordan Davis isn't just being evaluated on tape. He's being evaluated on leadership presence. Brandon Graham isn't just a rotational defender, he's a tone setter. Reed Blankenship wasn't just a depth safety, he was an example of development success. Even allowing players like Blankenship and Dallas Goedert to test free agency reflects respect. That matters in a locker room. When players see management handle contracts transparently, it builds trust, and trust carries over into buy-in when scheme changes happen. Nick Sirianni deserves credit here too. Many head coaches become rigid when their systems are questioned. Instead, he embraced evolution. He acknowledged the need for adjustment. That flexibility is often what separates coaches who last from those who flame out. The 2026 Eagles won't look radically different in personnel, but they could look drastically different in identity. More structure, more balance, more long-term financial planning, less impulse. And here's what makes this stretch so important. The margin for error tightens when you pay your stars. Draft picks must hit. Mid-tier signings must outperform contracts. Depth must be developed, not purchased. That's the reality of sustaining contention. So as we head deeper into combine week and toward free agency, understand what's happening. This isn't inactivity, it's recalibration. It's a franchise choosing sustainability over splash. But sustainability only works if the core players continue ascending. Jordan Davis must justify a long-term extension. Jalen Hurts must thrive in the new scheme. DeVonta Smith must elevate. Saquon Barkley must stay explosive. Nolan Smith must continue developing as a premier edge. That's the bet the front office appears ready to make. And if we keep pushing this conversation forward, there's another layer that fans really need to think about. Timing. Championship windows in the NFL don't just close because of age. They close because of financial mismanagement. They close because teams chase short-term excitement and sacrifice long-term flexibility. What we're watching right now with the Eagles feels like an organization trying to avoid exactly that trap. Look at the structure of this roster. The offensive nucleus is locked in. Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, the core of the offensive line. That stability gives the front office breathing room. It allows them to approach the draft without desperation. It allows them to negotiate from leverage rather than panic. But here's where the tension builds. When you invest heavily on offense, the defense must replenish through the draft. And that's why the development of players like Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis is not optional. It's essential. If those contracts hit the books at premium levels, they must deliver premium impact. There's no margin for regression. And that brings us back to identity. For a few seasons, the Eagles' identity shifted depending on circumstance. Sometimes pass heavy, sometimes run dominant, sometimes defensive line driven. What this new offensive direction suggests is clarity, a defined structure that complements the defensive philosophy rather than competing with it. A run-centric offense shortens games. It protects the defense. It controls tempo. It keeps pass rushers fresh. That's not just scheme, that's synergy. The belief inside the building seems to be that this structure elevates everyone simultaneously. Play action benefits Hurts. Motion benefits Smith. Box manipulation benefits Barkley. Time of possession benefits the defensive front. It's interconnected football. Now